There's a particular phrase doing the rounds in creative circles at the moment, usually delivered with a sense of smug finality. AI won't replace composers, it'll just replace the bad ones. This sounds clever, but it also neatly absolves the speaker of having to think any deeper. There's no curiosity required, no responsibility assumed, just a tidy slogan that allows them to appear informed whilst defending precisely nothing. The reality is far less convincing. AI is not replacing composers, it's replacing the need to hire one in the first place. And that is where the actual risk sits. Not in the fidelity, not in the realism, not in how convincingly it can imitate a style, but in its ability to be sufficient. It doesn't remove the artist, it removes the question of why you would even bring one in at all. If you want to understand why that matters, you have to stop thinking in terms of jobs and start thinking in terms of authorship. What's being eroded here is not just employment, but the presence of a mind behind the work in favour of mere output, immediate, compliant, and detached from any kind of lived experience. Machines are not becoming artists, nor is an artist someone who's capable of merely requesting output. Once we train a system on everything, everything begins to converge, and what remains is a surface-level familiarity that feels convincing enough to pass without question. And that is a fucking problem. There's no such thing as a neutral shift in a creative process. When a system like this enters the pipeline, it doesn't simply accelerate production. It recalibrates expectation. The threshold for what is considered good lowers because the cost of producing something passable entirely collapses. Risk becomes harder to justify. Why experiment when something serviceable is already available? Why pursue something distinctive when something familiar can be generated in seconds? And so, music gradually becomes less of a statement and more of a utility. It ceases to assert anything of its own. The deeper issue is not that AI produces bad results. On the contrary, in many cases it produces results that are perfectly competent. But that's precisely the problem. It gives you what you asked for with unnerving accuracy, but it doesn't question the premise. It doesn't interrogate the brief. It doesn't push against an idea that might be fundamentally weak. It complies. And that compliance carries the assumption that rarely holds up under any scrutiny. It assumes that the person using the service already knows what they want, that they're capable of articulating how something should feel, how it should behave, what role it plays in the experience, without leaning on something that already exists to anchor their request. In practice, most teams can't articulate that. They rely on reference because reference compensates for that lack of clarity. A composer works inside that ambiguity. They refine it, question it, occasionally they expose it. However, a system that accepts ambiguity without friction will return something equally ambiguous. If the thinking is vague, the result is convincingly vague. If the intent is shallow, the output reflects that with precision. Nothing in that process corrects the premise. It simply reinforces it. A system that never challenges your thinking will always confirm your limitations. There's a second misunderstanding layered on top of this, usually framed as reassurance, that this is no different to the arrival of synthesizers, drum machines, or digital audio workstations. Every technological shift has been met with resistance. This will follow the same path. It won't, because those tools extended authorship. They expanded what the human could do. They gave the human more control, not less of it. They require intent. They reward decision-making. They make the process more direct. What's being introduced here operates differently. This process is straying from creational to curational. You're not shaping material, you're selecting from outcomes. You're not making decisions in the work itself. You're choosing between variations that have already been resolved for you. The locus of control shifts from construction to selection, and with it, something fundamental degrades. When you write with a synthesizer, every parameter you touch carries consequence. When you generate through a service, however, the consequence has already been decided for you. Your role becomes one of approval. It entirely removes the very space in which authorship resides. The work is no longer something you arrive at through a sequence of decisions. Recognition is a far lower bar than creation. If a producer can type in dark cinematic combat music into a service and get something usable in 30 seconds, a huge number of projects stop asking the deeper questions. That's why, even at its most convincing, the result remains confined to the shallow end of the medium. You'll get something clean and consistent, music that fills the space, supports the action, avoids friction, but it won't linger. It won't unsettle anyone. It won't attach itself to the memory of a player in any meaningful capacity. Succinctly stated, it won't resonate. Then there's this other persistent promise attached to all of this. Personalization. The idea that a system will adapt music to the player in real time. In practice, this is built on a misunderstanding. You can't personalize meaning without someone who means it. Emotion does not emerge from responsiveness alone. It emerges from decisions that carry weight. Creation is not the assembly of data into a pleasing arrangement. It's an encounter with uncertainty. A composer brings context, obsession, doubt, a set of decisions informed not just by what works, but by what matters to them. Valuable because they're owned, because they could have been made differently and were not. That is where identity enters the work. That is where something begins to feel specific rather than interchangeable. None of this is to say that these systems have no place. If what you require is functional audio, something to occupy space without drawing attention, they'll do that beautifully. They're fast, they're inexpensive. But if you're attempting to build something that endures, then sufficiency isn't enough. So the question isn't whether AI will replace composers. It's whether you're willing to accept a version of your project that never quite says anything. If all you need is sound that functions, the answer is straightforward. If you want something that carries meaning, something that defines rather than decorates, then you still need a human being in the process. Not because they're irreplaceable in some romantic sense, but because they are the only ones capable of deciding that something matters and then making it so.